From the future of the internet, ladies and gentlemen, to the future of news. Now, we've heard a lot about how news organizations are seeking to adapt to the challenges of online, but we tend to hear from the editors and the publishers rather than those at the forefront who are actually gathering and telling the news. So today we have three journalists from the sharp end who are going to give us some practical demonstrations of how they are using technology in their storytelling. And first up, please welcome Simon Rogers, editor of The Guardian's Data Log.
Good afternoon. If anybody's still awake, you definitely get a prize. So I'm going to talk about how we handled the riots last year, because it was an incident where basically we had an awful lot of data and we had a lot of stuff to get through. So I can get my slides up. They're going to come up. So I edit The Guardian's data blog, and if anybody sees the data blog or follows us on Data Store, we publish data sets and we write about data and we kind of analyse data, and we're part of the Guardian's newsroom. So when the riots happened on a day much like this one last year, suddenly we were kind of confronted with tons and tons of information, lots of noise. We're thinking, well, how can we turn that into data and stuff that we can actually use? And this is the thing about reporting anything now, that you haven't just got the stuff coming from the wires, you've got all the social media, absolutely everything happening. It's very, very different to 1981, when we had to wait for Lord Scarman to come back and tell us what had happened. In the meantime, all sorts of rumours and suppositions can just become the law because people have nothing to counter it with. So what we did was, it kind of shows also how data journalism goes from being something very fast to something much more long form. I'm doing lots of slides in a very short time here. This is the first thing we did. Google Fusion Map. We use Fusion Tables a lot because it's a free tool, and we just put on verified events. So we had the wire reports that were coming in, we had stuff coming from our reporters, and there was a real hunger for that, just raw information. It was the biggest thing we had on the site in August. And we just recorded where things happened, the time of day, and the kind of event it was. Really, really simple data, but it proved to be really, really useful for us later on, because after that, people started getting arrested. And we thought, well, now that people have been arrested, we're going to get lots of official data. We'll be able to find out what kinds of people are being arrested, where they're from, how old they are, what sex they are they from poor backgrounds or rich backgrounds? And of course, what we didn't get for ages with that kind of statistics, what we got was this kind of aggregated stuff, which told us just things that, for instance, burglary, breaking in and looting was the biggest single offence that people were being arrested for. Except in the northwest, where the biggest offence was criminal damage, so there's kind of a bit north-south divide there. So what we went after were these things, which were the court registers. Every magistrate's court has them at the end of the day. People don't normally ask them. The great thing about them is they're full of good information that we could then use. So this is one from Camberwell, and you have a name, address, the age of the person, what gender they were, what they were accused of doing, where they were accused of doing it, which is quite important, and what happened to them. Because we wanted to look at how were people being treated in riot offences, were they being treated more harshly by the courts, where were they from? And then things came up, for instance, so the Prime Minister said very certainly the riots weren't about poverty. We thought, well, that's interesting. You must have some evidence or something if you're going to say stuff like that. So we took all the addresses that we had of where people had come from. We took all the riot events and we mapped them over these poverty indicators. Red areas are poor places, blue areas are rich places, and all those dots are where people lived. That's Manchester. Any patterns there? People came from the poorer places, and these were things that were then backed up by the official stats when they came out later. The other thing we had access to were 2.6 million riot-related tweets, thanks to Twitter. And we did a lot of very kind of quick stuff with that. This is something we just looked at hashtags. Biggest riot hashtag was actually riot cleanup, which was interesting because it was basically reinforced what we found later was that people were interested in using Twitter as a kind of information form. And we got a story on the front page. No matter what new media journalists tell you, getting a story on the front page of the paper is still what we want to do. And we were able to kind of map all of this stuff on the inside too, and we got kind of a lot of information that made kind of good stories, and good stories that worked across the site and in the paper. And the next thing we were interested in was who were the people that were writing, what they thought. So we were inspired by the Detroit project. We've never really followed this, which is after the Detroit riots, where they went out onto the streets and actually asked people why they were involved in the riots. And so we had our database of 1,000 people who'd been arrested, and I'm going to go back a sec, if I can. And we went on the streets and we actually asked people, why were you involved? What did you feel? what was behind this for you? We asked people questions like, how connected do you feel to British society? And if you ask most people in the country whether they feel part of British society, about 93% will say they do. It's about 25% of people who are involved in the riots. So it's kind of a different generation with different thoughts and so on. The other thing we were interested in was this idea of a riot commute, which the government had brought up. So we went with a transport mapping company to map this kind of model routes from people's home addresses to where they're arrested. This is London, if you can see it that well. London's obviously lots of villages joined together, whereas Manchester, which is the next one, has got a town centre and people live on the outskirts. So it's again working with people who map transport data, map how people get from one place to another to kind of show that data and bring a new kind of track on the story. And the next thing we looked at was the way that riots spread on Twitter. And some of you might have already seen this. This is the room at the London Eye was set on fire. Anybody know what London Eye is made of? Steel stuff. Anyway, still went around the web. The red circles are people countering the rumour. We also looked at rumours. I think the next one is that the rioters were attacking a children's hospital in Birmingham, which also wasn't true. The other rumour we've got on here, which I don't think is here, is that rioters broke into McDonald's and started cooking burgers, which actually was true. And the next stage of this, which we're doing at the moment, is talking to people on the other side of the barricade. So the cops, people in the courts who handled all those thousands of cases, find out kind of what they felt and how it worked for them. So really, I suppose, the reason this is an example is showing how something that starts off as a very kind of quick and dirty data journalism exercise using a lot of kind of free tools turns into something more sophisticated, more academic over time. And it was kind of a new way for us of telling a story that perhaps we wouldn't have done a few years earlier. Thank you.
Thank you. Now, we are going to go to our next speaker. You forgive me, because I've just gone and lost my notes, my intro.
I better hurry up because we don't have much time, but maybe I'll introduce myself. My name is Ivo.
Thank you.
I'm from Australia, and I'm for the last 3 decades I've been involved in television, mainly as a producer, journalist and executive producer, and for the last 20 years in a form called self-shot, what I call self-shot, what we now call user-generated content. So for me it's not a new thing, it's just easier to do now and much quicker. So this should probably be called the serendipitous future of news, and then we maybe would have got a bit more time. There we go. The kids that are growing up, what we're doing is we're running workshops with mainstream media and with schools to actually teach students and mainstream media how to use mobile technology to tell real stories. So everything's changing. Their sandpit is completely different to the one that we played in. The Goo Goo Gaga is replaced by Google Papa and Google Mama now, and I think their whole world is going to be different. How they tell stories is, of course, different, and their platform is going to be different. Of course, we all know who said that, Steve Jobs. My father said, learn the craft and you'll always find work. Neither of those blokes finished school. And we are at a critical juncture. That was Robert McChesney. So I guess what he's saying today is that we are at a critical juncture. How we use our artefacts, how we use our mobile devices is really, really important, because how we use them today will inform us for generations to come. So what we did was we decided to actually create a program that went out into the communities to teach people how to use mobile devices, to teach them how to make crafted stories, so that they were more than citizen witnesses, they were more like citizen journalists. We went to the Northern Territory, and I'm being really quick here, I'm sorry, just to get through. We went to the Northern Territory in Australia, and we chose 9, that was where the program started about 1.5 years ago. We chose 9 Indigenous people, and we put them through some training, and I'm just going to show you a little film, which should pop up now.
In February 2011, in remote northern Australia, an innovative mobile journalism program
the Catholic nuns have always been part of our life.
Gave a group of Indigenous people living in isolated communities.
Every Monday to Friday.
The technology and the skills to enable them to tell mobile stories.
Enjoying motorsport Malang.
From their own perspective.
It'll be proud of Mum and Dad.
The program was called Anti-Mojo. The Anti-Mojo pilot program was developed because powerful new media technologies may be one way to help Indigenous communities become less marginalised.
Good afternoon, Ramadan.
Anti-Mojo is a modern and more personal method of creating locally produced media content.
Editing the stuff, but it's a little gadget. You can do it by your hands, you know.
Xavier has been here for 3 years.
Or maybe you can go out fishing and just do the editing while you throw the line. Yeah.
I'm taking part in the Anti-Mojo.
With help from trainers.
Make the wide shot smaller than the gap.
And community support people. The team was quickly walking away and leaving the editing in their hands.
You can move it left or right, okay? Plus, video.
But this little gadget, you can do everything, you know. Just like that, you know, just snapping the finger.
Edited and published by the Mojos on the World Wide Web.
What's your name?
My name is Helen Brown.
So what is your name again?
Yeah, Ivo.
What's Mojo means?
Mobile journalist.
What is your name?
What's your job?
Journalist.
Is that something like news?
We teach you to make your own stories, so if the news people want some stories from here, they might come back to you and say, hey, Gerald, can you get us a story?
To show them how culture.
And that's what all 9 Mojos were doing day and night for 4 weeks, right across the Northern Territory. A modern technology providing a unique perspective of an ancient world.
So, be proud, Yulungo.
Anyway, sorry. They went on to win a bunch of awards. There were 9 of them. 4 of them ended up with in-community jobs as journalists. One of the things with most remote communities around the world is that you need to create jobs, but the jobs need to actually stay in the community. It's one thing sending people out to get trained, but then they've got to be able to have jobs when they get back to their communities. 5 of these Mojos are working as full-time journalists in their communities, providing a less marginalised voice to the outside world. So that's the beginning. We're then looking for sustainability for this and working our way towards introducing this to mainstream media. We went to a bunch of universities. We went to universities in Melbourne, in Sydney and in China. And we found that many of the students doing journalism in final year had not had any training in social media or video, and many of them couldn't write. That's what we found at these universities. So there was a real need for this to be introduced early on. We then went and thought, what's going on at high schools? And we found out at high schools that these kids here, who are all at about year 12, weren't digital natives at all. In fact, none of them had been doing this sort of stuff. Some had done some video, but very few had done any work in social media, and certainly none of them were training in digital storytelling. So there was a real need for it there. So we introduced a program there. And then we went to primary school and to lower high school, and we found our digital natives. We found them in year 7, the kids that were born in the era of undo. We found that they were actually they would experiment with these devices, they would fly on these devices, and they were very good at them. And in one particular workshop, we found the year 12 kids helping the year 7 kids with their writing, and the year 7 kids helping the year 12 kids with the technology, which was really interesting. So how does all this relate to news? Well, we're sort of getting there. So what we've set up now is we're setting up a hyper-local network, a hyper-hub with a whole lot of school communities that are going to be actually publishing their own work to a local, hyper-local network, and so that they can share resources, share ideas, and that's kind of been just being started now in Australia, and it's very, very exciting. Then we went to mainstream media. That was the final piece of the puzzle for us. What would mainstream media want? Do they want what we've been told, which is we want the raw footage, we want it sent up as quickly as possible, we want it at 270p, we just want it quick. Well, yes, they do. That's what they want. But right now, there are scenarios that actually we explain to them where they could have both. They could have that, and they could have the crafted story. The best camera people, the best storytellers are those that have to edit their own stories. That's what I've found working in the bureaus around the world for 30 years. So you don't ever have to make a story, you don't ever have to edit a story, but just knowing how it comes together helps you become a better storyteller. So mainstream media, the ones that we're working with now, want their journalists to send up the raw footage, but they also want them, if they're on location for a whole day, to actually craft something so that they get a unique package at the end of the day. You know, and it makes sense, because if it's just flown up there, someone else will grab it, and they'll wrap it, and they'll package it as their own. So this is a bit complicated now, but what we have now is a final model where we have schools, working with universities, and working with mainstream media. Schools actually working with their local media to supply stories to their local media. The local media building pages for these stories to go online. So that's kind of what we're doing. The importance of this is that it breeds citizenship amongst the students. It breeds character. Publishing stuff is really, really critical. And when you publish stuff, you actually try not to make the mistakes twice. It also, you know, I mean, 31 million hours went up last year, and that's, yeah, I'm one, and that's kind of enough to run 3,760 networks for a year, channels for a year. So we really want to make sure that that footage is something and is of consequence. So that's it. It's wrapped up. I'm sorry. That's what we're talking about. Thank you.
Our final speaker used to work at Al Jazeera, where he co-produced and hosted their social media-driven show, The Stream. And he's recently moved to the Huffington Post to launch their streaming video network, HuffPost Live. Please welcome Ahmed Shihab-Eldin.
Conserve your energy. You don't have to clap. It's pretty hot in here. As you all know, the Arab world is going through a period of revolution. And the media is also undergoing a symbiotic revolution. Social media was very much the catalyst for both of those revolutions. And if you will, to use a buzzword that I hear very often these days, it's so-called the game changer. Social media is, in my opinion, some people disagree, but hopefully we'll have time to discuss all that. For too long, the mainstream media has relied on a model that is as antiquated as it is ineffective at truly keeping us informed. Just as Arab governments are authoritarian, so is the mainstream media. But social media really has deconstructed the very paradigm that we are told the news. It allows one person to send a tweet, a photo, a video, and reach potentially millions of people, and then some. And this challenges not only their governments, as we've seen in the Arab world, in Egypt and Tunisia, and Google and Twitter and Facebook, and Google Plus has also played a role in all of that, but it also challenges the media itself. We no longer, as I said, want to be told the news. We want to be participating in telling the news, all of us, whether we're lawyers, bankers, perhaps even children. The question is, though, as journalists, as professionals, as media professionals, how do we leverage these voices? How do we make sense of the madness? Well, I'd be lying to you, quite frankly, if I told you that I knew, because I don't. But since I'm standing up here, I will tell you that the journey at Al Jazeera, but also the journey at the Huffington Post that lies ahead, is extremely exciting, and I'm extremely humbled to go on this journey and try and figure all of this out. And in a way, together, because at the end of the day, this is all part of the participatory revolution, if you will. So just very quickly, because I really want to get to the discussion, just over a year ago, we launched The Stream at Al Jazeera. It was about 5 months, no, actually, sorry, 2 weeks I arrived before Tunisia kind of erupted, let's say. And it was really aiming to try and be a show that would be interactive, that would tap into conversations that were already happening online. And we were going to try and leverage those voices to tell underreported stories, which we, and frankly I, for a long time now, feel the mainstream media here in Britain, but also in the US and across the world is largely missing. So I'm going to play a very short clip just to give you a sense of what the show looks like. This actually was a show that won the Innovation Award from the Royal Television, the Royal Television Society Award for Innovation in News. It's about Bahrain and the uprising there. So if we could just play that video, please.
Today, the political unrest in Bahrain may have been forgotten by much of the world, but netizens are pulling out all the stops to keep this debate alive.
The government, like the cowards that they are, attacked peaceful protesters in the middle of the night while they were sleeping.
We've gotten so many comments on Facebook. We have a tweet from Activate Bahrain saying...
We're getting a lot of questions on Google+.
Sure.
We're going to go to the first one from Michael Osterling.
Is there evidence that the Iranian Republican Guard is actually active in Bahrain?
I'm sure Suhail is getting very uncomfortable being on the same show with me when I'm accusing Sons of the King of torture and talking about how the king himself should be on trial.
Tweet us using the hashtag AJStream. Thank you, Ben. Thank you, Ahmed. We will see you all online.
Now, you may have noticed that the young lady there was actually accusing the Crown Prince of Bahrain of torture. I mean, take a second and think about what the implications of that could be for her, but in general. Her name is Zainab Al-Khawaja. She is a human rights activist. I could say she's a journalist, even if not professional. She's certainly been working harder than most journalists I work with, trying to get the story out from what's going on in Bahrain, even if biased. But it's worth mentioning her father, Abdel Hadi Al-Khawaja, has been on hunger strike for over 80 days now. He was detained last year, taken from his home. He was tortured, he was beaten in front of his family, and so on and so forth. But the reason I mention this is because even though this was the first time that she made these extreme allegations on international television for the world to see, she had been making them for months and months and months on Twitter. It was retweeted, it was cross-posted on Facebook and Google+. And you know, what this all points to is really that we can even, the way in which we operate as journalists, for example, instead of booking her in a conventional sense, I booked her on Twitter in my bed in the morning, just tweeting her, because I followed her, and so on and so forth. Now, just a quick summary, that show, that little clip, it included a 45-minute show that had 2 guests on Skype, 5 or 6 people in Google+ in a hangout from across the world, and thousands on Twitter tweeting in, challenging the very points and allegations that our guests, our esteemed guests, a member of the Bahraini government, and so on and so forth, were making. The truth is, no longer is it believable to sit back on our couch and watch some news anchor tell us what the news is. The whole notion of breaking news is broken because of this 24-hour news cycle. For example, how many times have you been sitting back on a couch similar to these couches and you're watching a report and it's about your home country or a country you've spent a lot of time in, and the only thing that can come to your mind, or in my mind, is that's bullshit. That's bullshit. That guy doesn't have it right. Well, now you have an opportunity to keep him in check. I guess here you would say bollocks, right? Bollocks. I'm learning, but my British accent's horrible. They say it sounds like Dick Van Dyke. Okay, I'm wasting time. I'm going to move forward. So having worked in traditional print newsrooms and broadcast newsrooms for too long, there was always this editorial disconnect. A lot of people didn't appreciate these digital enthusiasts, these young people coming in, or in some cases, older people who just want to promote these emerging platforms and see the potential. But we should not be wary of the citizen voices or feel fearful that these voices threaten journalism today or that they will replace journalism today, but instead that we should see them as potential sources. I'm trying to rush because I really would like to get to the discussion, but just 2 or 3 more points. Let's be real. We are all human. As humans, we all have stories to tell. We all tell stories to our friends, to our nieces, to our nephews. Perhaps your nephew tells you a story. When a story breaks, there are people on the ground who are there, they are invested, they understand the context, the culture, often the language, and just because they don't have professional training does not necessarily mean they are unable to tell a story, in my opinion. Is time up? No. Perhaps I heard something. Forgive me. This does not mean that social media and citizen journalism is replacing traditional media, nor should it. Twitter alone has changed the way we as global citizens communicate and the way governments interact with their people. Twitter, in the absence of journalists being allowed in, as was the case in Syria and Bahrain, becomes the wires. It literally becomes the wires. A few months ago, I resigned from Al Jazeera because a truly disruptive project came up. Rather than tell you the backstory, because we're short on time, I would just venture to say that I met Ariana at Zeitgeist, Ariana Huffington of the Huffington Post, and fast forward 6 months, I was in Vienna visiting my mother, massaging her feet, as any good Arab son does when he visits his mother. I think you might know what I'm talking about, or you're smirking because you think I'm silly. But anyway, either way, the new project is called HuffPost Live, and essentially what we're trying to do is take the work we did at the stream and take it even further. We're trying to disrupt the current TV media environment, which is, quite frankly, I hope we can all agree, or many of us agree, is failing us. We plan to put the community first. We plan to build this around engagement. And the Huffington Post is the best place to do it because it was born in the global village. It was born in the internet, or on the internet. It took us, to put it in perspective very briefly, one statistic, 7 years at the Huffington Post to reach 150 million comments. Which might, in my opinion, I could be wrong about this, but it's quite a feat to accomplish. So 7 years to get to 150. Well, the last 50 million happened in the last 6 months. So I think the timing is really now. And the last thing I'll leave you with is that what we're going to be doing is, rather than booking guests, as I told you, we booked at Al Jazeera guests using Twitter and some unconventional new emerging platforms, we are now letting you book yourself into the conversation. It's a live streaming network, as I said, 12 hours a day. There's a Join Us Live button where you create a 25-second audition. Someone on the back end looks. If we think you have a point of view, if we think that you could add to the conversation, perhaps you are at the scene of a crime or whatever it may be, then you click the button and then there you go. Skype in, Google+, whatever it may be. It's not easy. I'm speaking quickly, but it's not easy to make sense of the madness of millions of tweets. I spent a year trying to do it, and I had a lot of technology supporting me, and even then it was very difficult. But, and this is an important but, if I know anything, and if I've learned anything in 2 years, it is that we would be, I think in this industry, we would be fools as journalists to turn inwards or to turn backwards, rather than to reach out to these people. Especially considering what's happened in the Arab world on a personal level as an Arab, I think it's really important that we leverage those voices. And perhaps that revolutionary spirit is palpable, judging by the temperature in this room. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So we've got about 20 minutes. What I just wanted to begin with you, with all three of you really, is to what extent your new news gathering ways, if you like, still rely on big mainstream media brands, whether it's Al Jazeera, Sydney Morning Herald, or The Guardian. Any thought that citizen journalism, user-generated content, whatever you want to call it, was going to sweep away the old ways has kind of gone, hasn't it? These things are just, they need each other.
Well,
yeah.
Go ahead, please, go ahead.
Let's start at the end, yeah.
No, please.
No, just, yeah.
It's like we're Arabs. No, kidding.
I think that our role as journalists has changed, so we're almost like curators now. Certainly that's how I feel. And you know, I'm working on a post at the moment about the similarities of data journalism to punk. That sounds a bit weird, but you know, there's that great punk drawing which, you know, 3 chord diagrams underneath now form a band. Anyone can do it. And actually we're in a position now where, certainly in the area that I work in, the amount of free tools out there, the stuff that people can do, often with kind of much more original ideas than we would have. And they're brilliant. And our place is almost to take advantage of that and showcase the stuff because we have the platform. We have the platform people that have no platform. So we can kind of curate and pick out the best stuff. And often we find with the data, we publish all this data on spreadsheets that people can download. And actually, you know, out there are people who know a lot more about this stuff than we do. So what we want to do is bring them into that conversation and bring them into the way we tell the news. And then we get better stories out of it.
Ahmed.
The same question.
Yeah.
You know, I think it's just a matter of whether we want to deal with reality or not. And I think at Al Jazeera in particular, because of the story that emerged and the events that emerged on the ground, quite frankly, we were lucky and we were fortunate because we were well positioned. Because at the end of the day, it's really important that you understand the culture, the context, and that you have a keen sense of the nuances behind all the stories that emerge. And I think part of that means taking into consideration that it's impossible for us at Al Jazeera, at any news organization, to grasp that unless we're there, and we're there all the time. Well, the people who are there all the time are the people on the ground. And the only difference is that these tools are emerging at a rate that I think is unprecedented. And the sharing is unprecedented, and the social aspect of it is unprecedented. So, yes, I think, you know, it's even though this is the case, there still is this fear. I can tell you, I've worked at the New York Times, at PBS. It's changing. I think the fear is less palpable. Just as the fear factor, if you will, was broken in the Arab world in terms of people's right to self-determination and demanding that, I think the fear is less in the media that, you know, citizen journalism or whatever we want to call this will replace journalism. But there is this fear that it's inaccurate, it's not professional, it's not authentic, and therefore it's not valuable. Well, I really, truly believe that everybody has a story to tell. And, you know, if we toss out the idea that humans generally, of course there are rotten apples, of course propaganda exists, of course that happens on Twitter a lot, misinformation, but we have to trust at the end of the day that people are honest.
Oh, sure, and people also make mistakes. But I suppose my simple point is, actually, if you take a story like Syria, where there's been a huge amount of you know, mobile phone video pumped out by the opposition as a deliberate weapon to be picked up by the mainstream media, it has relied on a bit of video going onto YouTube, being picked up by Storyful, being picked up by Channel 4 News, being repeated on CNN, and it's only that route by which that piece of video is given authenticity.
Yeah, I think that's just because of the construct of journalism, and to be quite honest, there's a slight arrogance. But I think, you know, in Syria in particular, I think the burden of proof is never on the activist or on the journalist or the trajectory of going from one news organization to the other. The burden of proof is on the government, especially if the government does not allow professional international journalists in to cover a story.
Ivo, I mean, aren't you actually creating a whole new generation of professional journalists? You're not replacing anyone, are you?
No. I think that the real fear, I heard that word used, that the fear was amongst journalists, the professional journalists that I've been working with, was that they would miss out, that they would actually lose out. Not that the space would be overcrowded. What we're doing is creating, training people to think about this whole proposition, this new space, but to have their own voice, their own conversation. That's really important. You see, there's a big difference between citizen witnessing and citizen journalism. Nothing wrong with citizen witnessing, Arab Spring, you know, nothing wrong with any of that. What happens after? So we're actually creating people to think beyond that, and I think that's really, really important. And that creates a whole new conversation with universities, with J schools, and with mainstream media, and that's what I think is important today. The fear is in the people we're going to miss out. Now, what I'm seeing with mainstream media, the ones that we're working with, is that they have the great skills, the great storytelling skills. They're finding the technology really easy to pick up. It's really terrific. It's a wonderful time. And I think that the way we're doing it is validated, really, by the sorts of stuff like the Huff Live, and because people want more than just the witnessing. They want to be able to continue the conversation, right?
And in fact, if I may just quickly add, not only do they want to continue the conversation, you know, part of our motto is the conversation starts here, and not only are we inviting people to interact with us and, you know, tweet at us and so on and so forth, but more importantly, open up the editorial process itself. It would be wrong for us and arrogant, I think, to assume that we can decide what 35 stories a day to cover. So, you know, there are tools like Storyful, but there are also tools like Storify, which really allow people to aggregate tweets and photos and videos in a very easy drag-and-drop fashion, and then share that with us, because, frankly, we can't be everywhere, but people are.
But isn't it, I mean, in a sense, now we're in a place where actually our brands are even more important, because there are so many voices out there. So people will go to the kind of mainstream media to kind of find out who to trust in a way. So it somehow it kind of gives us even more power, which is something we have to watch out for as well, I think.
Can I throw it open? Who'd like to either ask a question or make a point? Yes, in the middle there. Can we get a microphone to this gentleman there?
Thank you. Surely what we're seeing is this evolution of everybody contributing to content. And if we go back in history, you know, we spend hours looking at people's journals to find out what they thought at a different time in history. Surely this is the new journal. People recording their thoughts, recording their ideas, and then contributing them so that they become part of, I think Bill Thompson called it the matroon of life, that there is a resource that we can all tap into. It's inspirational to see the Guardian stuff coming up there and actually overlaying different people's perspectives on a single event, creating a mosaic of history, and that's what you're actually doing. So can we not sort of use a different language about it? It's not them or us. It's not professional journalism versus society, because one man's journal written 250 years ago is a profound insight into a part of human life. And the person recording a video on a mobile phone today could be that person in 100 years' time. So that's just a thought I'd like to put on the table.
Simon?
Yeah, I think what's really interesting, crowdsourcing is something comes up. In some ways, these are really traditional things. Crowdsourcing used to be called surveying, right? But now it's crowdsourcing because it sounds kind of better. But essentially, what you've got is so when we did, say, MP's expenses, we had 450,000 documents. One person went through 29,000. One individual did that, and they probably know more about MP's expenses than our entire Westminster team now. But I think it's about kind of how we provide a platform for that, and also it creates a load of work. When you ask people what they think at your end, you then have to go through it, and that's something that people don't think about. People think, oh, it's just kind of parceling out your work.
Ivo, you wanted to come in?
Sorry,
there is a, I agree with that, but there is a difference. We actually in our work use and you can Google this, called Oscar's Sketchbook. It was a sketchbook, a journal made by a young kid a couple of hundred years ago, but the big difference today is that you can make this journal today, but it'll be published so much quicker than they were in the past. And that's really important. That, for my money, that requires a sense of understanding about the impact of that work. I think in there lies a difference, but yes, it's a journal.
Yes, up there.
Just interested in what the panel thinks about. We've talked a lot about education today in the Big Tent. What the panel thinks about the rise of data journalism and actually feeding that back into schools. I know you're doing some work on that already, Ivo, but as a general education principle and teaching data journalism, telling stories with data, all those sorts of things, and actually making that accessible through the education system. Thoughts?
Ivo?
I think it's really important. I think it's really important that we work with our children to think, and that we learn with our children today. My son lives in America, I live in Australia, but he's my font of information about the web and stuff, right? I think that's really critical. It's critical that we teach our young people to be able to get involved in the conversation on the Huff and to feel like they can speak, And we talked this morning about, I was surprised there wasn't a young person on stage this morning. I was amazed. We should have had one talking about their view about pornography. We're finding in these schools that the kids are filtering stuff themselves. Once they actually understand the power of this technology and their ability to create a story and to affect someone's life, they then take it very seriously.
If I may just add, I don't know if this doesn't necessarily answer the question, but perhaps somehow it's tangentially related. I think I'm pretty young. But I feel old, and I'm realizing more and more that I actually am old. And in fact, maybe I'm outdated in the sense that younger people, even 18, let's say 14, even 12, the very way that they have been raised with these tools at their availability, and these tools existing as facts, as daily realities, and how it can connect them with the world. I mean, I've been connected through my job with people who follow me on Twitter and who I follow in 141 countries, and that's an amazing connection. But when younger and younger people don't even see that as amazing, and don't even see borders and boundaries, I think inevitably the way that they understand journalism and the role of media, as I understood it, my generation or older generations, is completely different. And that alone, I think, is going to really define, what a journalist is, or whether it matters to call ourselves journalists, because a lot of media companies, New York Times and others, that have been around for 151 years, are now starting to change and invest in technology less than perhaps editorial. It's still important, but technology...
Simon, briefly, if you want to come back.
You asked about kind of teaching data journalism in schools, and I think it's really important because basically, we're not very good at maths in this country. I was terrible at maths at school, which is ironic considering what I do now. But part of the attraction of me now is that I get stories out of data that wouldn't get any other way. And you've got a whole generation of journalists now, who are kind of maybe older journalists, who came into journalism because they wanted to write, colour pieces and so on. But the younger ones who are coming up, we're seeing, journalism students who are coming to work for us and do work attachments who can program, they can hack, they can, they think nothing of getting a million-row spreadsheet and turning it into a story. And I think, taking that and then going to kids in schools is a really important thing to do.
Do you think the journalism itself, the process of writing, will be replaced? I mean, you see this new code has been done where you can just put in the facts and an article comes out.
I think what you've got now is you've got a type of journalism which enhances traditional reporting. So say when we had WikiLeaks, you had an amazing set of spreadsheets there, incredible set of data, but you also had Declan Walsh, people like that who know the story, sitting down and kind of working with the data, and we're trying to help them find the stories out of it. So I kind of think what you've got is something that makes traditional journalism even stronger.
See, just quickly, I don't agree. And my experience is different. I don't agree. No, it's the same as that. I don't agree that the mainstream newspapers are saying, give me the technology, forget the editorial. I just want to table that. I'm seeing it the other way around. I'm seeing it's a marriage between editorial, as it was said before, and the technology. It is really, and one of the great battles that mainstream media has at the moment is convincing its readers that its use of social media is actually well-founded and researched and checked. So I don't agree at all. In fact, I see it completely differently. Just a second. Let me just finish. The one thing that will change every day is the technology. The one thing that will never change is the skill set.
Well, as the technology changes, the skill set changes.
Well, the skill set's still about storytelling.
Of course it's about storytelling, but I mean, there are various skills for storytelling. I was only asking what you didn't agree with, and maybe I did misspeak. I don't think technology, and maybe that's what you were alluding to, I don't think technology replaces the editorial. I just think, as you pointed out, the emphasis, and I'm just telling you anecdotally what I've experienced. This isn't an opinion. It's just on, my limited experience, in the field in the past, 9 years. People are really, these companies are investing in people who have a widespread skill set, but most importantly, it's the data, it's the engineering, it's the ability to understand social and engagement and the technology behind it and coding. As our attention spans change, which is a reality we're all facing with. Some of you aren't even paying attention, even though, look like you're not paying attention, but you are. Forgive me. Some of you look like you're not paying attention, but you are paying. We are changing. It's a reality because of all the gadgets. I was listening. As that changes, so does the way we write, which is what your question was. For example, the reason I'm so enamored with Twitter is because as much as I love to read a long piece in the New Yorker or, any other, Twitter really makes you get to the point. You have a piece of information, you want to artfully convey it, good luck doing it in 140 characters. That's a new skill that didn't exist before.
Well, maybe. I mean,
well, okay.
There were headlines and things like that.
Brevity, yeah.
Yes, down here in the middle.
Hello. First off, for everyone in the audience who's tweeting how hot it is in here, please imagine what our poor panelists are feeling like.
It's even worse up here.
They're under lights.
I'm wearing a jacket.
We've only been here for a short amount of time.
I wanted to ask you that we are sort of in the era of citizen journalism, so how do you establish or remove bias from social when you're trying to establish a lead on a story? I mean, a good example is that in the early days of the Syrian uprising, I started tweeting out about things that I was hearing about that was going on, and I was virtually attacked from all these unknown assailants saying that I was a shill for the U.S. government and all these things were falsehoods. But when you really looked behind the scenes, there were very passionate, very articulate people on both sides of the coin who were very convinced that it was the other side that we're all evil and, we're all pristine and clean. From a journalism perspective, how do you establish who's biased? How can you do that in today's day?
Simon, I mean, isn't the truth that actually it's just old-fashioned journalism and moderating of information sources? It's the same way we've always done it, isn't it?
It's that Mark Twain quote, a lie can be halfway around the world before the truth's got its boots on, Jim Callahan said too. And the great thing about Twitter is that it will catch up. You get, like we saw with the riot rumours, you get rubbish out there and then you get people saying, well, actually, that's not true. And so you end up with a kind of a wisdom which is nearer the truth. And yeah, like you say, it's good old-fashioned reporting, checking sources and seeing where stuff's coming from.
Anyone else? Well, let me just finally ask you all, how do you measure success in what you're doing? When does it stop being an interesting niche for The Guardian to do the odd presentation on and become part of
I mean,
the mainstream, if you like.
In kind of terms that people inside the Guardian understand, we do pretty well with the biggest blog on the Guardian now, if after comment is free, which isn't really a blog now because it's a site. So, and what we find is that there's some stuff we do which really takes off, and often it's things we're not even thinking are big or not even kind of newsy. Like we did this thing the other day, we had the really detailed London voting stuff in the mayor election, just made a really quick map, chucked it up, and that was really popular. People loved it. And it wasn't particularly timely, it just that took off for the moment. But so I think if we, there's that kind of, raw kind of numbers come to sight and, and kind of the social interaction, and also the fact that, we're generating stories that the paper and the website wouldn't have otherwise. So, we sit next to the news desk, we're part of the news process now, and I think that's really important that, rather than being kind of the ghetto upstairs in a different room, we're kind of, brought into the whole thing.
Ivo, how would you measure your success?
Interesting.
Got a spider.
You got a bug?
Spider, yeah.
There's a spider. Right.
I don't kill it.
With, there we go, success. With the Indigenous first workshop that we did, success obviously was that it changed lives. The Indigenous people actually got jobs in the media, some went to university, all of them are working as stringers for 2 Australian networks. So that was success in one sense. At Extra Blood in the mainstream media, success was the fact that they learnt this one day and went out and made stories the next day. Success is a relative thing.
Could it ever be a commercially successful proposition, or is it always going to be a sort of a public service good that governments have to fund?
Oh, I don't know that. I don't know that it's one or the other. I think it's a relationship between the community and mainstream media. And I think that mainstream media and the community need to work out that relationship, fiscal or otherwise. And but I think that, unless we try, unless we that maybe have some skills, unless we democratise our skill set and along the way learn other skills to help create this new form of storytelling, I think that we're not doing our job properly.
Ahmed, how do you measure success?
I'll only speak on a personal level, and we have very little time, but I will say, just to quickly answer that question, I think everyone has bias, so I really do believe that, and I think that's why a multitude of voices is very important. Obviously, it is about curation, as he said, but in terms of measuring success, there's the business answer, but on a philosophical level for me, I think you measure success when you keep the public informed about things that you think matter as a news organization or as a journalist, but also about things that they tell you matters to them. And that's where social media and all these things can come in, because it helps us understand that. So it's a combination of both. And quite frankly, to compliment you, I think you also measure success by keeping those in power in check. And keeping an eye on them and keeping the public informed on that. Because, and the reason it's a compliment to you is because Google is extremely powerful, and I think your interview was extremely well done. So,
thank you very much. Well done, me. Well, on that note, a sort of awkward self-congratulation, thank you very much indeed to the panel.